Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Leadership Summit 2024 here at Abundant Life. We are so happy that you chose to join us this afternoon. Today, we are going to be talking about how to make a difference in your community, your workplace, your neighborhood, and mission field. Before we get started into that, though, a quick introduction. My name is Lance Pollard. My beautiful wife, Mandy, and I have 5 crazy awesome kiddos. We own and operate a couple small businesses here in Kansas City. I've spent some time in the music industry and most recently have been elected to the GVR 5 Board of Education. Here to my right is my father-in-law, John Hefner, and I'll let him do his own introduction here in a few minutes. Before we get started, though, I've got to share just a quick, funny story about John and I. Every year, my in-laws have a large fall festival where hundreds of people come out to their property. And the first time that I met John, I was dressed up as the Wizard of Oz.
The wizard himself.
Yeah, the wizard. The second time I met John, I was dressed up as the Easter Bunny. So I'm prefacing that to tell you that it was probably the 4th or 5th time we sat down and I called him up and I said, "Hey, John, I need to talk to you." And I think he knew what it was about. And I asked him if I could have his daughter's hand in marriage. You know, I love her, I respect her, I'll take care of her, and all those things. And he said, "Well, I will say yes under one condition, and that condition is if you tell her that I said no." Well, you can imagine how that went over. And I knew from that point on that John and I were going to get together or get together well.
But her and her mom came home. They were gone when this happened.
That's true.
Yeah, and they came home. He walks out with a sad look on his face. They're waiting to see what happened. And he said no. And my daughter, who lived in a cabin that's on our property, she took off running for the cabin. My wife came in after me. And then that's when I couldn't hold it any longer. And that's when they realized that we had just pulled a prank on them.
Yeah, we won't go into some of the specifics of their reactions, I don't think, today.
Or what she called me.
That's right. Anyway, so we ended up getting married, and it wasn't too long after that that John and I were outside chopping wood together, just kind of chatting about life and family and career, all that stuff. And he asked me a question. He asked me what my purpose was. And I kind of thought about it, and I don't remember ever have being asked that before. And it wasn't what I did for a living or whatever. What are you going to do with the gifts that you've been given? What's your purpose? How are you going to benefit the kingdom with your gifts you've been given? And today, John and I would like to talk to you about some practical applications of how we are leading in our community, our neighborhood, with our neighbors, our workplace, and in the mission field, and what we are doing every day to live out Abundant Life's mission statement of being living proof to a loving God, to a watching world. Today's key verse is taken from 1 Peter 4:10, which says, "As each one has received a gift, minister it to one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God." And for sake of time today, I won't get into all the verses on the subpoints, but I encourage you to look into them. That's your homework for today. Look into them, read them, and how they can apply to your everyday life. Love the Lord with all your heart, soul, and mind. I'm sure many of you have heard this verse, are very familiar with it. But for me, you know, what were some practical ways, or what are some practical ways that I'm living this out day by day in my community? Loving with our heart, loving with our soul, and loving with our mind. I found over the years that leadership in your community is a practical way to show the love of Christ while living out these biblical principles. And it was about 4 years ago, I started really paying closer attention to portions of our education system. And what I saw was that certain parts of the education system were not aligned with what I felt like our community's moral compasses were. And I kept thinking to myself, I'm like, somebody else will fix it. Somebody else will help out. I've got enough on my plate. We've got a business to run. We've got 5 kids. We're involved in church. We've got all these things going on. Somebody else will fix it. I assumed that maybe somebody else would stand up for what was right or what I felt like was right? Biblical principles. I kept thinking that maybe somebody else would be the voice for the voiceless. And as I saw that need, I really began developing a passion, I think, for being the change instead of just sitting back and complaining about it. I think it's easy sometimes to poke around on social media and be disgruntled with what you're seeing, what you're hearing about. And so I wanted to be that change. For me, it's difficult to fight for something that I'm not passionate about. And so I developed that passion. I also understood that decisions are made by those that show up. And it was time for somebody to show up instead of just sitting around and complaining about it and not being active towards a solution. I knew that by launching the campaign, I had a tough race ahead of me. I was up against 3 incumbents and a previous school board member. But we launched the campaign in faith. I understood that if I was elected, that this position would require me to lead, that I would have to be willing to sacrifice certain things in my life, that it would require me to give of my time, my resources, my experience, all of those things. And that would require me to deny myself of other things. Matthew 16:24 says, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. When you shine the light of Christ in the darkness, you need to be prepared for an attack from the enemy. And let me tell you, the school board is not a paid position, right? The school board should not be done just to build a resume. It's got to be done for the right reasons. It's got to be done for the right reasons. And for me, it was so much deeper than just my name on a sign or my name on a billboard. And so in the beginning, knowing that I had a tough race ahead of me, I was thinking, man, I want to find something that's easy. I want to find a common sense approach to things. And so I decided to make a social media post, something that I felt like every parent in the district, every person in the district could get behind. And that post basically said this: sexually explicit content does not belong in our district. To me, that's a given. We're talking about little kids here. That's a given. In my mind, that was something that every single person in that district could have gotten behind. And let me tell you, there was some backlash from a small group of people that I was very surprised happened. We had police reports, we had threats, slander all over the place. And so I went back to the Bible. You know that old saying, there's an app for that. Well, in this case, there's a verse for that. And Matthew 5:11 says, blessed are you when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. And it was around that time frame when I realized that I would be battling against things that people couldn't see, that I had to arm myself with the armor of God. My battle was not against people. My battle was against the evil. And at times, if I'm being honest, I really started questioning, why? Why am I doing this? This wasn't to benefit me. I was doing it for free, not making any money. There was zero benefit to me personally. But I also knew that as a believer, we are commanded over and over to not just sit by and let evil overtake the world. James 4:17, and this one hit me hard. James 4:17 says, "Therefore to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is a sin." Let me read that again. James 4:17, "Therefore to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is a sin." So we fast forward a few months. I ended up winning the election by less than 1% of the vote. There was actually a recount and certified the election about a week later. But we won. And so now as a school board member, I don't have a platform to necessarily preach in its traditional sense, but I do have a platform that allows me to be a representative of Christ and to stand on the truths of the Bible. Every day, I want people to see Christ in me. And so many times, members of the community have reached out just for advice on different ways to navigate some of the hurdles that they're facing in their everyday lives. And moments like that is when I get to let my light shine. Matthew 5:16 says, "Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." Because our faith without works does not reflect the life change that we have in Christ. 2 Corinthians 5:17, "Therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new." James 2:26, "For as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also." In my community, there are 15 or 16,000 people, and there are 7 people that sit on the Board of Education. I'm not necessarily encouraging you to run just for the Board of Education, but what I am doing is I'm encouraging you and begging you to get involved in your community. There are PTA groups, there are committees, city councils, you have parades and fairs and nonprofit organizations, homeless shelters. There are so many ways to get involved in your community to make a difference. And so my challenge to you this afternoon is to let your light shine by investing in the people in your community. Let the people in your community see Christ through you. Love your neighbor. Love your neighbor. This is a hard one, I think, sometimes because your neighbors get to see a lot of you. And in order to love your neighbor, you've got to guard your thoughts, you've got to guard your words, and you have got to guard your actions. And I'm going to turn this over to John now and let him talk about some practical ways and examples of how he's loving his neighbors in his neighborhood.
Thanks, Lance. Neighborhood, well, before I get into that, I have my wife, Vicki. I want to introduce my family. I have 3 children, Mandy, Alicia, and Micah. And I am blessed with 11 grandchildren. 8 of them are boys and 3 of them are girls. And as Lance said, we both lead our own business. And one of the most important advice that I can give you is if you meet Lance personally, think twice before you shake his hand because he's a plumber. And you know where plumbers' hands have been sometimes.
Amen.
So just
John,
think about that. As a young man, I always wanted to be a preacher. So 2 things kept me from that. I all of a sudden realized I could not speak like our pastor, Dr. Cavan in Springfield at High Street Church. That man he could just talk, and he would come up over the pulpit sometimes. I think he had a foothold underneath, and he would just he'd just bring it to us. And I thought, I can never do that, but I can talk. So that's one thing I have going with him. Plus, when I proposed to my wife, the first thing she asked me before she said yes, she said, "Are you going to be a preacher?" Because I was going to a Bible school at the time, and I said no, and she goes, "Okay, I'll marry you." So that was our introduction, and that was the final thing that kept me out from being a pastor. Like Lance said, his first impression on me was kind of skeptical of being dressed like he was and in costumes, but that was, it's been good ever since then. No, our thing with our neighborhood, whether you know it or not, I live in the country, so our neighbors are quite a ways away. And Lance is one of my neighbors. He's about 600 feet away, and the neighbors know what you're doing. They watch you. You're a shining light, whether you know it or not. They'll know when your lights come on. They'll know what time you go to bed because your house is dark. Everybody looks out their windows. They know if somebody's in your driveway. My neighbor Dave calls me and says, "Hey, John, describes a vehicle in your driveway. Do I go over and run them off, or do I let them in?" So people are always watching what you're doing. And one of the things that Lance and I did one time for our neighbors across the road, I love to mow grass. I've got 10 acres, and I mow almost all of it. But I love to mow grass, and I love to mow straight, and I like for it to look good. And so, people driving by see that. Haley, our neighbor across the road, came over and told me one time, "I'm sorry, my yard's not mowed." And I thought it was funny that she was apologizing to me. "But our mower is broke, and as soon as it's done, or I can borrow a mower from someone, I'll get it mowed." I offered my mower to her, and she's like, "No, I don't want to I wouldn't use your mower." And so they were going for the weekend, and I was on my way home, and I just happened to just glance over, and it just hit me. She's not mowed her yard. I'm going to call Lance. So Lance and I and our other neighbor, Dave, we got our riding lawn mowers out, and we mowed their yard for them. And it's probably 3 acres of grass. We mowed everywhere. And it was 2 weeks tall, so it wasn't anything we could do real fast. And to this day, and that's been, what, Lance, 3 years ago probably, or 4, they have never forgotten that we did that, that we stepped up. They couldn't believe that somebody would come and do that. So, there's ways to serve your neighbors. You can help them with trash. You can help them with leaves, mowing the grass, things like that. Take meals to them if they're sick. I plow snow for all my neighbors, and it's not a big sacrifice. I have a heated cab. But I just love doing it. I love snow. I'm one of the odd people, but I just love snow. So I like getting out into it. And the neighbors, that really means a lot to them when you do things like that. We get thank you cards, and I even got a fruit basket from a guy one time that I didn't even know. I just saw that his driveway was bad. I plowed it and left. He figured out who I was, brought me a fruit basket, and was crying when he gave it to me. He said, I've lived here 22 years and nobody's ever done anything like that. So I had no idea, but that impressed my neighbor. And another thing we do that we always have fun at is Dave, who you've heard me speak about, he's retired and he knows every river in Missouri and where all the catfish are at. And it's fun to go with him. But he always has an abundance of them. So we have community fish fries probably 4 times a year, maybe 5. And neighbors come that I don't even know. Dave knows everybody. He grew up in our area of the country. And so we do that. We have I guess in the city you'd call it a block party. We have a fish fry, and everybody brings their lawn chairs, and they just sit around and eat and everybody brings a dish, and you get to know your neighbors very well, and you'd be surprised in the conversations how much they know about you. Even though I've never met some of these people, and they know a lot about me. So, I just always advise to pay attention to your neighbors because they're watching you. We're all gifted with a talent, and we're set apart. God sets us apart with joy, peace, and kindness, and these things come out when you walk with God, and people see those. When you get up in the morning and go to work, you have lights on. First thing you do when you get out of bed, turn lights on. So, I'm kind of putting that toward we are a shining light for God. And when you come home at night during this daylight savings, you got your headlights on. Light is a thing that we use all day, and that's what God put us as is a shining light. And the workforce is another place that you are watched a lot. Your coworkers either like you or they hate you. I just make sure that I'm honest with my business. I'm always striving to be an example. I love working alongside of my employees and the subs that we have. I'll pick up tools, I'll carry things. I'm not just there to walk around and see how they're doing it. So I like to lead by example. And through that time of working, I have an iron worker that has just fabricated steel for me ever since I've been in business. He was just always my go-to person. His name's Bill, and he owns Bill's Iron. And I was just always around him. And we spoke a few times about God, and he talked to me about church, and I never pressed that hard, but as the years went on, he got very sick. He was on dialysis. He was monstrously overweight, and it was catching up with him. And he would always come and talk to me. And one day, he pulled into my office. He'd just come from dialysis, and he honked the horn because he couldn't get out of his vehicle. So I thought, well, I don't owe him money. That's usually why he comes. I don't owe him any blueprints because he'll come and have me run off blueprints for him. So I walked out, he rolled his window down, and it really, I can tell the story 100 times and I still break down on it. But he motioned me over to his window, and he said, I don't have a whole lot of days left. He said, once I quit dialysis, I'm done. But he said, I just want you to know that a week or so ago, I got saved. He said, I found Jesus. I stood there and I thought, that man just drove clear across town, not to get anything, nothing. He just wanted me to know that he had found Jesus. And so, I don't know if that's find your one or my one found me, and shared that with me that day. And I've never forgotten that. I've never forgotten that. And that's been probably the biggest example of what I can, your life is like, what your light that's shining is like, what an example you are to other people, whether you know it or not. You're being watched by your fellow workers at your workforce and by your neighbors.
And John, we'll switch to the next slide here. And I think John hit the nail on the head with, here we are talking about being an example, right? And trying to make an impact on somebody else's life. But you can see that also has an impact on your life every single day when you're living out those truths, and you get to see those situations come to fruition. Our third point is make disciples. Matthew 28:19. Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost. And you make disciples through the word. You make disciples through relationships. And then both of those, that is your ministry. And again, I know time is short this afternoon, but I encourage you all to look up these verses. And I'm going to turn it back over to John on how some of the organizations that he's involved in specifically not only are making an impact here in Kansas City, but literally around the world.
Okay, that comes across missions to me. Missions became something very, very important to me over the years. If you walk up to, if you ask a missionary, what can I do for you? And you might in your mind think, what can I get you? Or what do you need? There's something we need to buy and send over to you. The first thing, I've never seen a missionary yet that wouldn't just say, I need your prayer. Please pray for me. Because, that missionary knows through experience that, God's there, and prayer is the most important thing when they're in need or they're worn down, they're, ready to give up maybe, things aren't going well. They know how strong prayer is. And I've over the years, I've used my talent. God gives us all a talent. You've got some kind of a talent, whether it be a labor type of talent, a office type of talent, a financial talent, something like that. It all can be used. It's like, how can finance talent be used on the mission field? Missionaries don't run off of just prayer alone. It takes money to run a mission. And over the years, maybe 32 years ago or so, we took a group of men to South Indian Lake, Canada. We tore down and built a log cabin for a missionary that was up there. You went in by ferry boat. It wasn't like you just drove in and out to town. Went to Tyler, Texas with a couple men. We built a church in Dillon, Montana for Dean McQuillan, who went up there to start a church. I've worked on a few local churches around here, just helped them out. But my present thing that we've done since 2018 is gone to Mongolia. And, we set a timer on our trip from the time we leave Kansas City and the time we actually get there. Last year, it was 54 hours when we finally got there to where we could start working. But we go there to just help this missionary I met. His name is Mickey. Their name is Mickey and Trina Kofer. They're missionaries. They've been there about 22, 23 years in a little town village called Havskol in Mongolia. If you look that up, when they got there, no electric, no running water, no cell phones, and God just put him in that town. He lived 5 years in a ger, and a ger is like 20 feet in diameter, little felt igloo-looking building. Some people call them a yurt, but it depends on where it's made. That's a difference in the name. He lived in there. He told me, he said, I learned how to take showers with a 2-liter pop bottle with one hole popped in the bottom of it, tell the kids to get outside. And he said, that's how I'd get my bath. Or you walk down and jump in the 45-degree lake and get a bath. He did that for 5 years before they were able to move into a home. And he took 4 young children. They already had 4 kids when they left. He took 4 young children there, but he knew God had placed him there. So I met him before he left. And for years we spoke. They would come home and he would make sure he got in touch with me. He'd have blueprints. But in that period of time, he was able to buy a textile factory in that town that the Russians had built during World War II for uniforms. It had closed down, was gutted, but the building was standing there. And God gave him that building. And his vision for that is just phenomenal. And I can't get into all the details. I could talk forever on what he's done there. But, he asked for prayer. He's a prayer warrior. I mean, he'll get up at 4:30 in the morning and he reads the Bible, 10 chapters. He goes on a 5-mile run and prays the whole time when he's doing this. He works out, all this. He said he's got to keep his body in shape so that he can finish his ministry there. And, when we got ready to go and take our trip there in 2018, I had a man at church. His name is Jim. He came up to me, and he's a prayer warrior. I get to pray with him at church, and I'd look forward to the meetings when they'd ask us to pray, and I'd get with Jim, and we'd pray. And he dug in, he opened up his billfold, and he reached back in the corner, and he said, "Now, John, I want you to use this to go to Mongolia." He said, "You use this," because we're buying this materials and supplies, and he gave me a $100 bill that I know had been in his billfold for a long, long time. So I have another person that's been donating money to this cause. It takes lots of money, and he's donated hundreds, I'm not talking hundreds of dollars, he's donated hundreds of thousands of dollars. If we need something, if I say, I need 90,000 to buy these boilers for shipping over there for heat, okay, check's there in 2 or 3 days. He'd never bats an eye, but I'm telling you, that $100 meant as much to me and to Mickey as the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And these camps, the reason we go there, and really I got a burden for it, is we're putting a heating system in. It's 470 feet long and 70 feet wide, 2 stories high. And we've been shipping boilers and putting in radiant heat in this building now since 2019. And it will further that ministry. They had, let's see, how many was it? 289 kids come to camp this year. That's one of their biggest ministries, 289 campers. And that's just this year, and they've been doing this for years. And 151 made a profession of faith. So and they can only do this in the month of July and maybe the 1st of August because of the cold temperatures. So when we're putting this heating system in, he figures he can start having camp in June and go all the way to November or even later, and they can have indoor. So that's just what we use our skills for. I have plumbers, boiler makers, welders, carpenters, electrical, HVAC, these skills. But we even have men that don't have mechanical skills like that have gone with us. One of the men here at this church, Tim McDowell, he's not a carpenter, he's not a welder, and he went with us, and really I wonder why he's coming. But we got into a bind. We're trying to put this heating system on Wi-Fi so that we can control it from right here off our cell phone. And we could not get it on there. And I thought, maybe Tim knows how. Brent, one of the men, goes over to Tim and says, "Hey, can you work on this?" And it was a matter of like 30 minutes. And he had us up and running on Wi-Fi. So you don't have to have these spatial skills. Anybody can go do these. So, just think of that. And there's trips to Africa, Jamaica. Jamaica's a lot warmer than Mongolia. And so just think about that in your skill. You don't have to have a carpenter skill or some kind of a labor skill to go on these trips. And I just challenge you to use what God's given you and go on these trips. And if you want to know any more about Mongolia, I got 8 men going this year. I need 11. So you can talk to me afterwards or email Bill Gibbs, the missions pastor, and he can fill you in on our trip.
Thank you, John. It's looking back over these 3 points, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Love your neighbor and make disciples. They're imperatives, which requires action, right? An imperative is a command, and a command requires action. And this has been such a fun time today, doing this with my father-in-law, John, and for me being able to, I guess, sit back and watch him over the years, daily be an example in the workplace or neighborhood or community has helped me and my family. And now my kids get to grow up seeing pops working for the kingdom. And although we have so many things in common, business owners, and we're involved in the community and church and all these things, our real bond is through Christ. right now John, help me out. I'm trying to think of all the stuff we're involved in here at Abundant Life. We've got music, missions,
Serve team.
yeah, guest services. So this isn't just when you're not at church. We are involved at Abundant Life, and we do these things, I guess, behind the scenes in our day-to-day life. And you've heard Pastor Phil, over the last few weeks, reiterating the point that every person has people in their life that they have influence with. And we just want to encourage you that no matter what your skill set, you do have a skill set. You do have a gift that can be used for the kingdom of God. We want to thank you all so much for being with us this afternoon. It really does mean a lot. And one more reminder to be living proof of a loving God to a watching world every single day. Thank you all.
I got one more thing. God wants us to shine His light. I'd say follow your heart, but don't forget to take your brain with you.
That is wisdom right there. I'm going to remember that one. Thanks, John. Thank you all.